So first of all, welcome to the Spinal Correction Mastery Call. We got a lot of good stuff today. So I'm going to share my screen, but today we're really going to talk about not so much the how, but we're going to talk about back to the why. And I mentioned this to Dr. Brian the other day, is that I want to get back to the roots of subluxation and how that fits into our practice as principled chiropractors and bringing that message to the masses. How do we use subluxation effectively? How do we think about it? How do we train our teams on it? How do we use it in our practice and communicate it very well to create a big subluxation-based practice? So I'm going to share my screen. All right, cool. So subluxation and chiropractic, and this is, and I want to go back to, because we went through a whole transition. Myself and Kim, when we built our practice, we started right from school. And many of you were in the same boat, and I know that because when we got out of school, we didn't really understand the profession, that there was so much difference in the profession from a way to practice, from a mindset, from a philosophy. And we just thought what we learned in school was standard. And we didn't know that different schools taught different techniques or different philosophies or anything like that. So we just basically learned what we learned in clinic, and we thought that's what applies into practice. So we started our practice in that way. And of course, being graduates of a Canadian chiropractic school, all we knew was some sort of therapy, some sort of pain relief, and thought that that's what chiropractic was all about. So it was a transition of learning over those first few years that really helped us to define who we were as chiropractors and what we wanted to communicate to our patients and how we wanted to care for them, what message we wanted them to receive. So we had to, and this is the thinking, we had to let go of some of the things that we did in the past to move into the future, to move into what we wanted to become. So it was how we created this multi-seven-figure subluxation-based practice. And we had years where we were seeing a lot of people, and many of you know, we grew a practice to 1,200 visits a week. We had a full-time marketing person. We were really active in the community. We were collecting a ton of money, like more money than we ever thought we could ever collect, for a long time, and sustained that for a while. And then decided over time to say, okay, we needed to create a good team so that it wasn't us working in the practice all the time, which we, again, were really successful doing. So it was a great ride. For 30 years, it was a great ride. It served us well, and it served our community really, really well. And now the cool thing is that it's still going on. My associate bought the practice. He's taken it over. They're doing extremely well and have sustained it. And many of the patients, because they were so well educated, have stayed with them, a huge percentage of them. So that's been great. How we implemented subluxation into our practice. So like I said, the transition took years. We thought what we learned in chiropractic school was all that we needed. And I know many of you are in that same mindset. People came in with symptoms, and we used those symptoms as the measure of outcome. So in our early stages of practice, and many chiropractors are still in that mode, is people come in with symptoms, and usually it's pain. And we use that method or that mode of measurement, if you will, to say that they're getting better because the pain's going away. Well, and obviously we all know that that's not the best metric to use. In fact, that's a very incomplete metric when we start to understand the whole concept of what we try to deliver. So people came in with symptoms, and that was the only outcome measure. So finally, we made a decision, and it was a result of immersing ourselves in different seminars, hanging out with different people who thought differently, getting some mentors, getting some coaching. And we finally made a decision to say we wanted to change our practice into a very specific, principled, subluxation-based practice where people understood the principle of chiropractic like we became to understand that, because that took some time. So we started to add congruent systems. We got rid of the old systems that we'd started with, the modalities and all the things that we used in clinic and school, to start to use some better systems that were more congruent with what we talked about. And we decided we made subluxation the enemy. We really immersed ourselves with the principle of subluxation, what that caused, and that was the ultimate thing that we were going to correct. We eliminated the word treatment from any of our vocabulary, because treatment was perceived as the application to help somebody with their symptom or with their pain. So we decided we will not treat anybody. We were there to correct subluxation. That's what our goal was. So, and we inspired and educated people about the principle. In fact, that became the vision of the office. It was about not necessarily getting people under chiropractic care. It was about sharing the principle with everybody that we knew, our family, our staff, any talk that we ever did. It was all about principle. So why use subluxation? Well, we had to forget what we learned. We ignored the controversy. And I know many of you going through school, there was always this controversy about subluxation. You know, some schools say that's not a term that we use. Other schools try to define it and they argue about the definition. You know, so we decided that we wanted to put that into our perspective, which I'll get to in just a minute. And why we wanted to get away from this pain model, because here's the thing. Pain is treated by so many different professions. So MDs treat pain, osteopaths treat pain, naturopaths treat pain, registered massage therapists or licensed massage therapists treat pain, physiotherapists treat pain, and most chiropractors are treaters of pain. So we wanted to differentiate ourselves. Why would we do something that everybody else did? In fact, of course, being in Canada, being in Ontario, where we had the socialistic healthcare system, if somebody didn't know what we did and didn't realize what we did was different and perceived us as a treater of pain, why would they come and pay us cash out of their pocket when they could go to the MD and the socialistic healthcare system paid out of our tax dollars for them to go see the MD, so it wouldn't cost them anything out of their pocket? Why would people think? So we had to become very unique. We had to educate people and position ourselves as being different. So subluxation is something that's very unique to chiropractic. Nobody else, no other profession corrects subluxation like chiropractors do. Nobody addresses it like chiropractors do or should do, okay? Subluxation is the root cause of incomplete healing. Incomplete healing. So it's not the cause of pain, it's not the cause of symptoms. It is a state, it is actually a circumstance where the body cannot heal. It can't function effectively. And we're going to talk about this in detail. So subluxation, the correction of subluxation increases the value of now what you bring because you're doing something completely unique. And if nobody else can do what you do, all of a sudden you have tremendously more value because nobody else can do that. So you remove the whole pain from the conversation, and it allows now a reason for lifetime care. If people were not in pain and they didn't understand this concept, why would they keep coming for a lifetime? So I want to ask you guys, and I want to open up the channel here to say, what is your definition of subluxation? I want you guys to chime in and add to this because I'd love to hear your opinion and your position on it because there's no right or wrong here. So let's hear it. What do you guys think? What is the definition of subluxation?
One thing I would say just on this principle piece, as you guys are thinking of the answers, and it's Colin's asking us to create some conversation around it because it also, if you can say what your definition is or how you think of it, also is going to help you when you're having the conversation with patients. I ran the pure principle call this morning. It's short and sweet. It's 15 minutes, but it talks about principle, the space we stand in and the gap we need to fill versus what's going on in the world right now, what people want. By the way, the new stats show that only 40% of people have any trust in what they're being told by their medical doctors or hospitals, but they're also not lined up at our doors. So that there's a huge gap there right now. They're not lined up at our doors because they don't know what we do. We don't know that we're that alternative. So in that, to hold on a second. So in that I do give action steps there. So it's how to build this. It's how to build this ability to understand it, to communicate it with team, with patients, to get that going. But if you guys want to go on based on what your definition of subluxation is, this will help in that first piece of how you communicate and how you deliver it to patients too.
So let's hear it. What's your definition of subluxation?
Hey, Colin, I'll chime in. It's Phil. So really, I think the root definition is less than the normal amount of light. And so I think when, Didi made up the term, I think he made it up with like a pastor or somebody like that. And And that was the definition. It was less than the normal amount of light when you think of light as an energy. So it's less than the body's ability to send the energy from your brain to all your cells and your cells back up to your brain to control all health and healing. You know, and it goes back to you're made from one cell from a mom and one cell from a dad, and that same power that controls you is the one that's healing you. And you know, that's really the root definition from my perspective. And then you get into the mechanical part, which we were taught in school, right?
Awesome. Awesome. Anybody else?
Hey, so it's Tony.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so for me, like I'm very spiritual, which goes hand in hand with chiropractic. So for me, when somebody has subluxation, that means that they're not at their fullest potential. They're not the best version of themselves. So everyone wants to be the best version of themselves. And I always say, if you have any nerve pressure anywhere, you cannot be that, whether that's you being the parent you want to be, the spouse you want to be, the person you just want to be in general, you cannot be that if there's subluxation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Tony, you wanted to add in?
Yeah, actually, it's just, you know, similar to what they both said as well. Is when I talk to the patients, we go over the nerve chart and the spine itself. I always come back and say, well, subluxation isn't just irritation from your nerves, but anything at all in our lives that are stopping our nervous system communicating with our body and optimizing. That's generally what I'm saying.
Cool. Those are really good. So here's, I'm going to carry on here with this, and this is, I think, going to resonate with exactly what the three of you just shared. Is what is the definition of subluxation? Well, what I decided is that because there was, and when I was in school back in the early 90s, there was so much controversy about defining subluxation. It was ridiculous. It got to the point where when we would go to class, it would become like a big joke. Like, what is subluxation? And the way that the profs would describe it, and does it exist, and is it a mechanical thing? Is it a neurological thing? You know, so I decided, and Kim and I both talked about this, is that rather than trying to debate about a definition, we would provide a perspective. And what we did is over the years, put this into 4 different levels of perspective. And I've actually used this to explain to patients as well. So here's perspective 1. Perspective 1 is a misalignment or partial dislocation of the vertebrae causing facet irritation, abnormal motion, inflammation, and local nerve root pressure. So that's something, and I would say this is the lowest level of thinking when it comes to subluxation, because it's still better than the pain model. It still goes to root cause to say if the bone's out of place, it pinches a nerve. This is the pinched nerve theory. And typically, if you think of a pinched nerve, most people would assume that's painful, right? So this is a pain-based model of subluxation. So we thought, okay, well, that's the entry level, if you will, as far as subluxation. But many people who have debated about subluxation, or perhaps migrated into a subluxation-based practice from a very therapeutic-based practice, can resonate with this definition. So it's fine. It's a nice entry level of being able to describe subluxation. Bone at a place, presses on a nerve, causes inflammation, causes pain. That's the root cause of the pain. We correct subluxation, take pressure off the nerve. Fantastic. The body starts to function better. Well, the next level is a little greater. And I think this is actually a little more of a bigger perspective when it comes to subluxation. So now we say, okay, abnormal motion of position, not just of the individual segment, but it's a universal alignment. So if there's a subluxation at C2, it's also affecting the thoracic and lumbar spine. And contrarily, if there's a subluxation at L4 or L5, and that causes perhaps a disc bulge, that's going to affect nervous system function. That's going to affect the entire body. So now this universal alignment of the spine, whether it's a scoliosis, whether it's abnormal curvatures, that is a bigger picture. So it says it impedes both the afferent and efferent nerve transmission. So not only will it cause a change in sensation, like the perception of pain, but it's also affecting nerves that now go to the organs, go to the systems, go to the cells, and that causes the body to start functioning abnormally. So the body functions abnormally as a result of subluxation, and the subluxation doesn't have to be a local subluxation compared to where the symptoms are, if that makes sense. So that's perspective 2. And I want to open up your mind here and say, okay, now we go to perspective 3, and this is even bigger thinking. So now, if you take perspective 2 and say, okay, we have subluxation, it's affecting us neurologically. It affects the meninges, it affects the flow of CSF, it affects the transmission of nerves from the brain to the body, body back to the brain. It's a complete inability now to adapt. And this is the biggest thing, because this truly, I feel, is the root cause of all people's illness, health, early death, and lack of creativity, lack of full function, lack of their potential. So this is the root of unmet potential. So the complete inability to adapt to one's environment, contributing to a state of constant decline, unmet potential, inadequate healing and function, and ultimately an early death. So do subluxations kill? Absolutely they do. And this is where we come back to this, to the definition of, okay, well, what's the difference between subluxation and cancer? Well, the only difference is time. If there's a subluxation present, it is causing the body to function abnormally, and it is in constant decline. So the subluxation is not a state, it is a process. It is something that's happening over time. It's either, and I used to say this to patients, if you have subluxation, it goes in 2 directions. It's either continuing to get worse if it's neglected, or you start getting it corrected and it becomes improved. Like you correct the subluxation. So it's not staying where it is. So if you see your x-rays, see that there's subluxation in your spine, you have an abnormal curve, you have a scoliosis, you have pelvic unleveling, you have osteophytes, you have disc degeneration, whatever that is, you have subluxation in your spine, you can choose to ignore it, but realize it's worse tomorrow. And the next day it's even worse. And the next day it's even worse. So either you choose to ignore it and it gets worse, or you choose to get it corrected so it starts improving, starts getting better. So that's perspective 3. And then I would say, then you take it to perspective 4, which is even just ultimately bigger thinking. And Phil, I think you touched on this, is that where now you get perspective 4, where this subluxation is a complete separation between the physical body and the spiritual body. It's a separation between the body and the soul, the innate intelligence, which is connected to universal, and subluxation disconnects those 2 intelligences. So you cannot be connected to universal intelligence. You cannot be connected to the universe. It's a separation between man and God. And that's really, when I think about subluxation, that's how big it is. So now, think about it this way, it becomes a universal rift that not only affects the subluxated individual. So if one person has a subluxation, it impedes their function, it impedes their potential, it impedes them as their full creativity as a human being. They don't become the person that God intended them to be. So now, not only does it affect them, it affects all the other individuals that they come in contact with, and individuals that they would come in contact with. So 6 degrees of separation. It's almost like it's a global tragedy. The butterfly effect, if you've ever seen the movie The Butterfly Effect, with the theory that a butterfly flaps his wings on one side of the world and it causes an earthquake or a hurricane on the other side of the world because of the connection within the universe. And that's a huge thinking. I know that's very abstract for many people to think of, but if you look at, like Phil says, the energy that exists within us and around us, when there's a different frequency of energy created because of subluxation, it affects everything that it becomes in contact with. It's just very abstract, but very different thinking. And so that was the thinking that we actually brought into the practice. And the thing is, when you start to communicate it, some people look at you like you got 3 eyes, but other people resonate it with it so much, and would look at us and say, why hasn't anybody ever explained this to me? And that, all of a sudden, when you get somebody saying that, the light bulb goes off and their mind opens right up, and all of a sudden you have a warrior patient for a lifetime. So when you start adding it to your practice, let's look at the practical causes of that now. Okay, so practical causes is that when we, and here's the interesting thing, and now, and obviously with us doing marketing, and this is something that we just had this meeting this week, is that bringing into marketing, I said, you know, we have a gift. We're so blessed to be chiropractors providing marketing services to chiropractors, because we can take this principle and start to add it to some of these marketing campaigns. So we're in process right now of creating marketing campaigns that are going to get people to think differently and introduce them to subluxation. So it's looking for root cause as opposed to treatment of pain. So we're bringing that into some of our marketing systems. So many of you that are marketing with us, or we're grateful to be doing your marketing, we're going to be sharing some of these ideas with you and different creatives and different campaigns and so on. I'm going to ask you guys, and this is awesome to hear you guys' definition. And I'm going to ask you, are you being congruent? Because can your staff actually state that same definition that you just stated to the rest of the group here? Or is that something that you keep to yourself? And I would say full congruency would say, if that's truly what you own and what you believe about what subluxation is, do your kids know that? Do your staff know that? And do your patients know that? And if they don't, that creates an incongruency. It's like me having the palm trees behind me in the wind, but I got my flannel shirt on, you know? So it's an incongruency. Something doesn't match up here. So, you know, Phil, you use that dimmer switch analogy and the lux meaning light, and that's a perfect definition. And we used to say that to patients all the time, is that when you have a subluxation, it's like the dimmer switch is turned up. The dimmer switch is turned up, so there's resistance now. The nervous system can't function at its full potential. The brain's sending 100% of a message from the brain, but only 80% or 60% or 40% or less are getting down to the body because the dimmer switch is turned up. So when we go in and adjust, we're actually taking the pressure off the dimmer switch. We're turning the dimmer switch down so we get full potential. There's no resistance now on the nervous system. There's no resistance on the neurology. Look at your new patient paperwork. And is it specifically designed to ask intentional questions, not necessarily at pain, but at function? How are the subluxations affecting your function? How are they affecting your relationships? How is it affecting your work? How is it affecting your sleep? How is it affecting your overall life? Rather than, where's the location of your pain? How long has it been there? Does it cause radiation? You know, all these clinical questions that we were taught in school. Now we have to start thinking differently to help plant the seed about what we do is something different. We're looking for root cause. On the office tour, we trained on this nonstop in the fact that this was their first introduction to subluxation. And we wanted to make sure that our staff through that office tour said subluxation 11 times. That was specifically in the scripting, 11 times. So they would go through and they would show people where they were doing their wall tractioning or their wobbling. And they would talk about that's specifically done to warm up their spine to help those subluxations be corrected more. This is where the doctors do their specific adjustments to correct subluxation. This is where people would do their vibration plate so that these subluxations can be stabilized after they've been corrected. So it was all geared on specifically relaying that message. And then through our consultation examination, I relayed that and I said, through my consultation and exam, I want to make sure I say subluxation 11 times. And there's an intentional reason why we say 11 times. And again, that goes back to creating relationships and remembering things. There's actually been studies been shown that for you to remember something or own a principle, you need to be exposed to it 11 times. So that's one of the reasons why we did that. So we wanted to do objective, repeatable measurements in our exam to identify and monitor correction. So what we did, and here's a big thing for many of you on the line, and we've had conversations about your examination and what happens during those examinations. If we're still doing orthopedic tests, which I did for the first couple of years in practice, because that's what we were taught in school, but what do orthopedic tests do? They monitor range of motion and tension or resistance on a joint or a set of muscles that cause pain. So an orthopedic test is limited when you challenge a joint or challenge a muscle because of resistance or pain. So again, it's just reinforcing the whole pain model. So we got away from all orthopedic tests. We didn't do one orthopedic test in our exam. Our exam was specifically designed to find subluxation. And here's a really interesting thing too, is I specifically, if somebody came in with a symptom of lower back pain, one of the first things I would do during the examination is palpate their spine. I would immediately, intentionally go to the opposite end of the spine. And often, and I knew I got to them when they said, no, doc, the problem's down here. and I would say, I'm looking for the subluxation, which may be the root cause of the problem. So I would go to C2, C1, C2 to start with if they had lower back pain. And contrarily, if they came in with migraine headaches, I would typically start in the lower back, intentionally going to a different area of the spine just to get them to think. It was like a pattern interrupt to specifically do that. So then the next thing on a practical level, report of findings. So report of findings was all about correcting subluxation. So it was relating the overall effect of subluxation on the nervous system and organ decay. So again, when you go into day 2, we have found subluxation in your spine. It is worse than what I thought. Not only is it causing your pain because it's choking those nerves that are going to your lower back, causing muscle spasm and whatnot. My concern, it's also affecting nerves. This is the big thing. It's also affecting nerves that are going to your bowels, that are going to your pancreas, that are going to your kidneys. And it's going to cause those organs to continue to decay if we don't get this corrected. So again, it's shifting their mindset into this whole, I'm in pain and I need pain relief, to holy smokes, I better get this thing corrected because it's destroying my function. So, and remember, it's always, subluxation is a process, not a destination. And that's one thing I want to make sure the patients understood, is that this thing is there. It's been there for a while. It didn't just happen. And if it doesn't get corrected, it gets worse. The big thing that we talk about with home care, and this is one of the main reasons why we wanted to implement home care, because obviously you get better correction to show to the patients that, yes, their spine is improving. We're getting better curve in your cervical spine. We're starting to correct scoliosis. Couple things, it gets them engaged in their care, so they become an active part in the correction. So it's not all on the doctor. So if you're not doing home care with every patient, or at least the majority of your patients, I would encourage you to rethink that and at least get them doing something. Get them doing wobbling and rolls at home. Get them doing some, even if they're not doing wall tractioning or head weights or Cervigard, get them doing something to engage in their care, because it helps them to understand that this is not about pain. It's about restoring proper alignment so the nervous system can function better. Okay. I hope that makes sense.
I'd like to jump in with something that might bring some questions or some discussion, and it's about kind of the four levels of perspective you had on explaining subluxation, Colin. Reggie had something similar. It's different though. It's got the kind of the 4 levels of patient care, which is different than what Colin talked about, but it's a good way to kind of, I find it, evaluate like what you have for patients inside your practice. Being level 1, there are people there for aches and pains. Level 2, they're there for some type of symptom, but it's not necessarily like a sore back and neck pain. It might be something around organ function, digestion, something like that. But it's still symptom based. It's just not the physical outside pain. The challenge you get into with both of those is a lot of times the conversation sticks around symptoms, and it's almost described as like they're medical patients inside a chiropractic office. Those type of patients likely then dive into, what Colin's describing as kind of the different perspectives of how you define or how you communicate subluxation. The third level in Dr. Reggie's was that they're patients there who are there to stay well. So they're there for wellness. They're not there for symptoms. And then the fourth level is those are patients who are there for a lifetime. It's not about staying well. It's about maximizing their human potential, their ability to be all they can be, the best dad, the best mom, the best sister, like whatever that is. And so like I use that with my team when we're trying to define, so what level of patients do we have? And with Colin going through his kind of 4 levels of describing subluxation, I guarantee if you connected those, that if you have a level 1 patient, you probably have a lot of level 1 and level 2 conversation that Dr. Colin described with your patients. So even though it is subluxation, you're still talking so much about the mechanical and symptom piece of it. So it's a great way to kind of examine who you're dealing with when you're in re-exams, the questions you get, and you can start to define like, so do I have level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4 patients? And if you want something different than what you're having, it's likely going to funnel back into what Colin covered a few slides ago, is what is the level of subluxation conversation you're having with people, and how are you leading them, inspiring them, teaching them?
Awesome. Any other thoughts before we move on? I want to go over re-exams and re-signs and how we bring subluxation to re-exams and re-signs. But anybody else have any thoughts or questions?
I've got a question with how you relate that with the function. Are you guys using the functional level approach? Like, okay, so by the time you came in, this could be in the doctor's report and how you relate it. And if you bring this back in progress exams and re-exams and so on, but you don't feel pain, only 10% of nerves feel pain. So bringing it to that point where they understand you can't go by pain from just that level of it. But a lot of ML docs are using the functional level, which I never really got into as well. So I'd like to hear the analogy on that. Like, so that, you know, if you were operating without any discomfort, you're operating at 60% or whatever, you know, that function chart I'm talking about? Do you guys use that? And if you don't, then, you know, no worries. I'm not currently using it, so I've thought about incorporating it.
Yeah, so great question, Phil. So I would say, you know, we based a lot of what we talked about on X-rays and proper X-ray alignment, cervical curves and scoliosis and so on. And I just
Right.
relate that to the fact that if there was pressure on the spinal cord, it affects everything. And I would go through, you know, so if you're having high blood pressure, if you're having heart disease, if you're having breathing issues, if you're having kidney issues, if you're having incontinence, if you're having erectile dysfunction, you know, I would list off a whole bunch of different things. And ultimately, what that led to, it led to, like in doctor's report or re-exams, or even just in daily, you know, table talk, people would immediately think about somebody. It would stir up their memory to think about, gosh, I know somebody who's having erectile dysfunction. Do you think this would be helpful? Bring them in. Let's check them for subluxation.
Yeah, I would say, Phil, like we're gonna get into the exam stuff here, and like all these things you do, like the balance, the posture, the range of motion, the nerve scan, everything, it's all signs of subluxation. And you know, the body's, you know, maladaptation, or you know, the interference. The x-rays tell us where it is, and what do we got to do? Take pressure off the nervous system. So the only time I use like the function chart is that, like, if 100% is over here, the problem is things are happening slowly and gradually over time, and you don't feel symptoms till way down here at that lower percentage. You don't know you have a problem. Like the alarm bell goes off when there's crisis. Like that's the only way we use it. It's to help people to start to, you know, cognitively get around the idea, like, hey, I just felt it last week. But we all know, and we see x-rays a lot of times, it's like, well, that's phase 2. There's 20 years worth of damage there. I know you felt it last week, but this has been in process. So that's where we use the function chart to help put some thinking, or some, like, whenever you're explaining it, I guess the biggest tip I could give here is try not to use such big words or such, you know, techie words that may make sense to us as doctors, but make sure what you're saying is creating a picture in their head so they can see it. If they can see it, then they can much better understand it, and they can then relay it to their friends and family who also need to understand it.
This is a really good conversation. And Phil, I think this is one thing that I can try to identify from what we're talking about here, is that when we were having a lot of success in the office, it was because of our energy and our ability to get so excited and so passionate about subluxation and its devastating effects to human potential, and sharing that with emotion and animation. Like, you know, I mean, you know me very well, and we've been friends for a long time, and I get really excited about stuff. I really, and especially when it comes to chiropractic, and that's how I was in the office. I was really excited about stuff. So people, it would be less about me trying to teach them something and more about me getting so animated that subluxation is the enemy. And people would just say, okay, yep, I get it. I'm buying into what you're selling. I'm picking up what you're putting down. So I'm coming in. Like, you know, I'm signing on, I'm bringing my family, whatever that is. So I wasn't worried so much about charts or visuals and stuff other than the x-rays. but it was just about me getting excited about it, passionate about it. It's a great question. Great point. Okay, so if nobody else has any points or questions, I'd like to move on here just to talk about re-exams and re-signs, because hopefully this will give you a couple of ideas on how you can implement certain things or deliver certain things in your re-exams and re-signs to get better follow through and better congruence with your
One piece, if I can jump in before you do that, Colin, just like as Colin's going through this, so we want to walk into this. This is going to give you tools, strategies to get better at this. Quickly do an internal survey, like I talked about, those three or those four levels of patients. Who do you have more of? And then going into this, you need to be looking at what Dr. Colin's going to talk about now. So where do I got to get better? If I have a bunch of level 1 and level 2, and I really want level 3 and level 4, what are these strategies I need to now change and improve based on what Colin's going to go through with you guys?
That's a great measurement tool right there, is how many patients do I have of each category. That's excellent. So we did every re-exam. So every re-exam, every single patient got a questionnaire, and the questionnaire was very intentional. We asked intentional questions, and it wasn't about how is their pain coming along. We asked them about why they came in the first place and what they remember from seeing their x-rays. And ultimately, I wanted them to remember that their curve was too straight, or they had a scoliosis or pelvic unleveling, or whatever it was that we were focused on to show the subluxation patterns in their x-ray. So it wasn't about pain or no pain. So the questionnaire was also asking them questions about why is it important for them to keep coming. And one of the regular questions I would ask during re-exam is, what would happen now to your spine if you decided to stop? I asked that every single re-exam. That was my number one question. I would fit that in there somewhere. I would make sure that I asked that to, even if they were a patient of 15 years. I never assumed that anybody was going to be a lifetime patient. I always went into it with the mentality, they're ready to quit. They need to be reminded. And here's the big thing, is that people don't need to continue to be taught. They need to continue to be reminded. So you may have told them this 100 times. Make sure you tell them the 101st time. So ask the patient why they need to keep coming, and have that questionnaire, make those questions intentional. Monitor the objective measurement. People love visuals. So they want to see, remind them what their x-ray looked like at the beginning. Remind them how it's corrected over time, or take the objective measurement on the re-exam, whether it's that nerve scan, whether it's a bilateral scale, show them the differences. And hey, if you do something that it's getting worse, that opens up the door to ask questions like, okay, what's been going on in your life? Because clearly your subluxations are worse at this point. What's happening? Thoughts, traumas, toxins, right? There's something that's got to go on to cause that. If there was none of those stresses, you would continue to be getting better. You would continue to be healing, because we've been correcting the subluxation. Obviously, you've been resubluxated. So I would constantly remind them of these different things. So, and that's a great question too, because sometimes they do a re-exam and something shows up worse. Well, it's never the chiropractor's fault. It's like subluxation is the enemy here. What's happening in their life for them to be getting worse? Let's dive into that. So we review the x-rays, the scan, the posture pictures, bilateral scales, whatever visuals you use, whatever metrics you use to show them that subluxations are getting corrected. It's never about pain, never. Ask for testimonials and use the exam findings to show those corrections, right? This is the time to ask for the testimonials. And this is one thing that we got really consistent with in doctors' reports, is that trying to relay the message by using stories. And it would be a story from where the person was when they came in, what types of problems and symptoms that they had, how it was affecting their life. It's show them their x-rays, talk about their course of care, what objections did they have? Oh, this is going to cost too much, or it's going to take way too much time, and manage those objections through the story, and then show the correction because they finally gave in and decided to do it. They had to borrow the money. They had to take time off of work to come in to make sure they got their third or fourth appointment in that week. They had to get the support of their family. Yes, maybe the husband or the wife had to come in and see their x-rays, so they got support at home. These were all the objections that we would manage through the doctor's report or through that report of findings. because they're going through people's head. So if we could address them first, all of a sudden you squash them. And so we would use their exam findings to show that this is what happened with the correction, and then their testimonial at the end of that story. So we manage the objections by using the full patient story from start to finish, including their exam findings. Always use the orthodontist analogy. People relate to that. Like, you get braces on your teeth. Everybody knows after you get the braces off, you have to wear and I would always say it like that. You have to wear and then somebody would say retainer. Two, three people say, oh, retainer. Exactly. If you didn't wear the retainer, what would happen to your teeth? Oh, they would get crooked again. Exactly. Well, so when your problem goes away, when we get the subluxation corrected, how long do you need to maintain your spine for to continue to have good health? How long do you need to have your spine checked? And ultimately somebody, and I'd sit there and pause, somebody would finally say, rest of your life. Exactly. Rest of your life. So and again, here's the objection. So when you hear the story, when you go to chiropractors and they just want you to keep coming back and keep coming back, who's heard that? And I raise my hand. Who's heard that? And ultimately 2 or 3 people, 5 people, whatever, would put their hands up. Well, of course. Well, wouldn't you like to get your subluxations corrected and know that your body's functioning well? And how long would you like to maintain that for? Beautiful. I mean, I get adjusted at least once a week, and I will for the rest of my life. So my kids get adjusted regularly, and they will for the rest of their life. So I would share that with people all the time, very passionately. And here's the thing is that when you own it so much, you get to the point where you don't care what people think. I don't care if they sign on. But I want them to know what I know. That's my service to them. If they can understand subluxation the way that I understand it, I've done them a service. And then they can choose to get care or not get care. That's totally up to them. And then what we did is we actually started changing the wording and the way that we relayed the message to. So we didn't have maintenance plans or wellness plans, because that really meant nothing. Everybody has maintenance or wellness plans. Subluxation prevention plan. So our maintenance plan turned into a subluxation prevention plan. So after your initial intensive plan, after your corrective care plan, you would start a subluxation prevention plan. And that would mean you would come in once a week for the rest of your life, or you would come in once every 2 weeks for the next year, and then we'll reevaluate, whatever that is. And we always talked about the 3 T's plan for lifestyle coaching, which and I've talked about this many times with you guys, is that this is a great opportunity to start stacking care plans. So if you have a nutrition plan that gets them on a good source of nutrition and changes their whole biochemical makeup, because now they're eating better, reducing toxins, getting proper nutrients in their body, that's a prevention of subluxation. That's why we do that. So wouldn't you like to have that nutrition plan and be monitored for your nutrition on a regular basis, to have great biochemical function in your body, and also get your spine checked on a regular basis to prevent subluxation? And we stack those 2 care plans together. And yes, so now we've got this $12,000 care plan, and people will go, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. And so we had people doing chiropractic and nutrition, but it was financially a great thing, but they know why they're coming in. They're coming in to get their subluxations corrected and prevent them from happening over the long term. So it's just changing your thinking, guys, and making your function in your office, your procedures, congruent with that thinking. So just some final thoughts here, and then we'll open it up for more comments and questions, is that start to identify, Brian, you nailed it, is you start to identify areas of your practice that are incongruent, where you're communicating symptoms. And I know many of you, because you're not seeing 500, 600, 800 people a week, have many incongruencies. Because if you had these things all in line, if your staff was trained, if you really were communicating subluxation properly, there's no reason you couldn't have a practice of 500, 600, 700 people a week. No reason. So commit to a life and a practice of congruency. That's the number one. And be willing, here's the big thing, be willing to let go of procedures and people, okay, procedures and people that don't serve your purpose. So whether that's team members, whether that's family members that don't support what you do, you can still love them, but it doesn't mean you have to hang out with them. Make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who support your purpose. So identify that. And if you're doing procedures in your office, if you're still doing orthopedic tests on your exam, it's time to reevaluate. What are you trying to communicate? Give away, and here's my final thought, is give away the principle. Everybody deserves and has the right to hear the principle and own the principle. Everybody deserves the right to that. but it's a privilege to get chiropractic care. So charge for the correction. Give away the principle, charge for the correction. You deserve to be very well paid for what you do because you have something that literally transforms people's lives. Don't undercut yourself. You shouldn't undercut yourself. People deserve the right to hear it, but they are privileged to be able to pay for it. Okay, final thoughts. Any questions on that? You guys have some things to add?
Or if not, what are you changing based on what you learned today? Or what do you think you need to improve based on what you heard today?
Hey, Brian said the other day, we were talking about this, is we really need to get back to this because when we talk so much about spinal correction, and Corey's done a fantastic job about teaching us what he's learned and implemented into his practice about spinal correction. But if we get so caught up in spinal correction, I actually had this conversation with Tony a couple of years ago, is that we become mechanics. It becomes very mechanical, and we start to talk so much and get so much into detail about the mechanics and ways and drawing the angles and the proper curves and the proper corrective things to do. But we have to make sure that the patient understands why that's happening. And we have to be better at that.
Well, I can tell you 100%, like 10, 15 years ago, I sold curve correction. It was a mechanical model of chiropractic. I was selling curve correction, but once the curve was good, well, then what, right? So there needs to be an understanding that the structure determines function, but function's what we're after because that's what controls your body's ability to adapt to an environment, and your body's ability to adapt to the environment is what health is, right? That's what health is. It's if it's too hot outside, how does my body cool down, adapt to this environment? If it's too cold, how do I warm up? If it's whatever, there's all these kinds of viruses, right? It's that adaptation and your body's ability to adapt function based on the environment so it thrives. But you can take correction to the mechanical if you're not intentional about it.
Anybody else? Any further thoughts? All right, guys. Well, I hope that was helpful. Reach out if you need anything, if you want to talk about anything, or if you want some help with something to implement something, or you're just a little uncertain on how to do that. I'm happy to get on a call with you. We can work out some of the details. But it all comes to mindset first. Okay. All right. No call next week. Okay. It's the last week of August. So next week, I believe, is the 29th. And then we'll start with our C4 call the first Thursday in September. Okay.
Have a nice week, everybody.
Cheerio. Peace out, Lake Trout.
Bye. Bye.